I just realized we're now live. We weren't
We're
live.
now-
We're live. Okay. So I went through all that and we're not live. Okay. I was like, where are their comments? I always get comments.
Oh my God, how funny. Welcome.
Okay. Welcome. Unidos. I had just gone through a 5-minute spiel and realized I didn't actually press the live button. So welcome to those who are joining. If you're joining in, please let us know in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. I love kind of seeing, people's backgrounds. So drop it in the comments. I'm going to make this shorter than I did the first time. But I guess that was a jump start. I just got back from traveling. So today we're talking about collaboration over competition. And today's title of our discussion is Entre, Comadres, from Saboteurs to Unidos. And we're talking about how sometimes the biggest barrier is other Latinas, that we get in each other's ways, and how this is actually something that can be detrimental to us all. It impacts us all. And so how do we move past this kind of female rivalry? And how do we embrace each other? How do we support each other? How do we sponsor each other? How do we collaborate with each other? And even like for our Latino counterparts, like how do men support us? And so I want to open up this conversation. I think it's super important because I hear this time and time again. I was telling the Las Doctoras that I was in a conversation this weekend with someone who was in a position of power and influence. She's Latina, and her biggest challenge are not non-Hispanic counterparts, but they're other Latinas, right? And so it's a real struggle. So we want to open up the conversation and really, and I want to say this conversation is even modeling that, because I don't work with Las Doctoras. They're in a different, they have their own institute, but this is what modeling looks like. Like we have the same vision, and, I'm happy to support them and bring attention to what they're doing. And they've been super supportive of me with some of the stuff that I'm doing because our values align. And so I just want to point that out. So let me tell you about El Puente. El Puente is a dynamic institute with the purpose of advancing the Hispanic Latino workforce. They do research, they provide strategic advising for the C-suite leaders, and a lot of their education is central around cultural drivers and identity. They are focusing on guiding C-suite leaders to strategically position their Latino Hispanic recruitment and retention efforts. But most of all, they stand for creating influence and impact to empower the Latino Hispanic community and unleash their full potential. So I'm all about that. So let's dive right into this conversation. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Patricia. If you wouldn't mind just telling me a little about, your cultural background and just a snapshot of your professional background too.
Yeah, buenos dias, buenas tardes, depending where you're at. I'm joining you from Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia. I'm an immigrant, first-generation college student, the first in my family as a Latina to do many things. I have spent most of my life in higher education, actually working mostly with Latino students, providing access, retention, and success. When I went back to get my doctorate, I really got interested in Latino leadership and how do we transition from education to empowering young Latinos to go to the workforce and become the leaders they could be. So my research is really grounded on Latina leadership development. I was fortunate enough to run into Dr. Patty. There's Patricia and there's Dr. Patty, so a little confusing. Just share the same similarities. And once again, instead of getting in the way that we were both interested in the same thing, we decided to join forces and with Alejandra, and that's why we're here today. So I'll pass it on to Patty. You want to go next?
Yes. Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Sorry for the hiccups at the beginning, but we are here ready to provide you with information, research, and best practices on how all of us as Latinas can continue collaborating, and really what are the things that get in the way of our collaboration and being unidas. My name is Dr. Patty Delgado. I'm originally from El Paso, Texas, the beautiful Sun City border town. And my experience is in industrial organizational psychology. So I am a business psychologist. So all of my background college as well as career is about how do we improve the workforce? How do we help the employees in the workforce as well as the leaders? So I'm super excited to be a co-founder of El Puente Institute with these two amazing comadres of mine that, yes, we had an opportunity to meet about 2 years ago, each of us, and just came together and thought, you know what, we really need to come together as Latinas and let's make something happen. So the Institute was born, and we are happy to speak to anybody about what El Puente can deliver your organization, you as an individual, and how we can continue collaborating. Really, that is, thank you to Ruby for your amazingness to bring this together, because it is about collaboration. So I'm going to hand it over to my comadre, Dr. Alejandra.
Thank you, Dr. Patty. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. I have a little bit of a cold, so just bear with me, but I could not miss this opportunity. My name is Alejandra Rodriguez Milky. I am originally from Monterrey, Mexico. I've been in Austin, Texas for 22 years, when I came here to work on my PhD at UT Austin. I've been in the field of education for a long time. And recently, about 5 years ago, I decided to go and see how the corporate America was treating the Latinx students that I saw in many schools and universities before. So I'm in the business of making leaders. We work together with Patricia and Patty on helping organizations support their Latinx leaders. We want to ensure that we can close the gap in Latino leadership. And we want to do this by understanding our cultural identity, right? Who is it that we are as members of the Latinx community, and how does that impact our leadership performance, our leadership actions and reactions? So we are here to talk a little bit about that, and talk a little bit about also what is this thing about the struggles that we sometimes find when we try to collaborate or when we work together with other Latinas. So it's an important conversation, and we want to thank Ruby for having us here today and for allowing us to talk about this topic that is very important. So we can see the comments here, so please keep them going. And if you want to send a message to somebody who is there and you think they would be a great part of this conversation, make sure that you send them a message they can join us today. So, well, why don't we just go ahead and talk about this? Ruby, do you want to start, or should we start? How do you want to do this?
So, one of the questions I want to have to just kind of frame this and set this conversation up is, and I hear this from, women in general, whether Latina or not, like, why is it that women, the biggest challenge is the woman manager getting in the way of another woman moving up. And so my question starts off with asking, like, where does this women rivalry come from? And then how is it specifically different for Latinas? Like, when we have that Latina rivalry, like how is that? How is the nuance different? And how does culture impact that kind of female rivalry that already exists?
Yes, and I can start. I mean, we are not going to, of course, pinpoint to every single factor in this situation, but we have something that some information that we have gathered through research, right? A lot of these things is not totally our opinion, is what we have learned through research, because there's information out there that we are basing what we're going to be talking about today. And there are a lot of factors, right? One of them, and kind of the most general one, is this idea that as Latinas in this country, right, we come from a lot of different countries, right? We come from a lot of different motherlands, right? We have countries all over Latin America, some in Europe, right? So we have all this connection to different countries, right? To different whether we are Mexican or Cuban or Puerto Rican or from Dominican Republic, we have these things that kind of separate us, which also talk about the diversity within the Latinx community. That is very important to keep in mind, right? But we have all these things that sometimes, instead of uniting us, sometimes they kind of separate us. And one of these things is this belonging to all these different communities or different countries, that whether or not we know or we want to admit it, we sometimes have different values, different understandings, different ways of seeing the world. So that's one of the first things that comes to mind when we think about this difficulties that we sometimes have when we are talking to or collaborating with each other.
And I think, yeah, thank you, Alejandra. I think also another, to set the context of why Latinas today seem to have this just innate behavior of comparison syndrome or of ENVIA, it goes back to a lot of the history of women in the past and the survival mode that women had to make. The Latina story from the past, of course, is different from other women's stories of other cultures. And what we saw in the research is that the Latina woman, although we did experience back, if we go way back in 1500s, right, experience the oppression and that form of discrimination, the Latina woman always stayed next to the unit. We were never separated from our unit or our families to have to fend for ourselves. So we were never taught, even early on, way back then in those generations, the need to collaborate with other women of other families, or there was collaboration that occurred, but not that innate, like, I got your back type collaboration, right? That I would go to the mount with you. And so I think it's also another part of the reason why we're seeing that it's a little harder for us in this modern day is based off the old generational scripts and narratives that we've been hearing, that we've seen that we stand with our family versus we don't stand with each other. So that's another reason and context that we uncovered.
And Dr. Petty, if I could chime in here, because this made me think of a podcast that I was listening to around this subject. And it was, I'm trying to think exactly, but I'm going to kind of weave it in here. It was about, and so I'm wondering if this is almost generational, because what I've seen is like think of like my mother, grandmothers, and how they would sit around with their comadres and hermanas, and then there would be this conversation of, it was always like this kind of like passive aggressive, like, oh, pero tu marido no hace esto, like, or mi hijo, like, right, is doing this, right? And so there was also, I feel like this older generation, maybe, I don't know that they intended it to, I don't know that they were bad intentions.
Right.
It was an impact to that because we saw that comparison. Has any of the research kind of shown some of that too?
Yeah, most definitely. So it's always the way that what we viewed as we were growing up, what they viewed as they were growing up, is just generational experiences and perceptions that we just grew up with. And yes, there is that underlining script or narrative of ENVIA that comes with being a Latina. Although all the comadres sit together and we talk about basically anything, there was always that underlining of, oh, pues mira ella con su hija, o no vas a creer. The chisme was always like alive and well. And so with all that comes this maybe unsureness, right? And not sure who to trust when you're with your comadres. So I think that also is what kind of feeds into it. And I know Dr. Patricia has a lot more that if you can share with us too on the way that the cultural drivers, our scripts, our old values impact even the way we see each other as Latina women. Yeah. Because her and I have the conversation. We all have the conversation all the time.
Yeah. So there's a couple of reflections. I think some of it is what perpetuates this ENVIA script. This part of it is sort of a little bit of like modern day telenovelas, where we're kind of seen as like pitted against each other, and like that's how we function as our dynamics. And then there's research out there that as Latinas, we tend to create what we call the triangle drama. And so there's always someone that is the victim, someone is the aggressor, and then there's always the savior. And we seem to follow really well into that pattern of the triangle drama. And we perpetuate that and sort of bring it out to other situations. And then lastly, I think a lot of, sadly, ENVIA is really reinforced because of a scarcity. So when resources are less, right, when opportunities are less, it doesn't matter who it is, and not even within women, but different racial groups or different needs. We almost have to be pitted against each other. And so I think it's I've been doing a lot better about that when something happens, to actually name it and say, we're both competing for the same thing because there's a scarcity here. So first of all, let's point that out to see how we can get more resources and more opportunities. And second of all, let's work together. And that's kind of what the three of us have been trying to do with other Latinas that are doing exactly the same thing we're doing.
Mhm.
And we're like, there's enough for everybody, and together we're more powerful. And so it's just about shifting that mind frame, and being intentional about it. But I think it starts with awareness. You have to be aware first. Is there an awareness that this is something that I easily engage with? Where does it come from? How do I deal with it? And how do I change it? Because when we talk to just about any comadres, when we get together, and Patty's the one that actually said, I think there's got to be a little research out there on NVIDIA script. We really got to get into it. We've been very thoughtful about anytime we enter with collaborating with another group of Latinas, so that we talk about it up front, that we're like, okay, we could have a little bit of this. How are we going to handle this? And I think it's been having those open conversations and talking about it has really helped. As Alejandra would say, if you can name it, you can tame it. Yeah. And so kind of start to think about that.
So addressing it head on is one of them. And Dr. Patricia, this is actually one of my questions that you kind of just touched on is, I think because the scarcity, because Latinas, like there's only 2% of Latinas in attorney roles, or only 2% of Latinas in tech. Right now we have 3 CEOs leading Fortune 500 organizations. So there's this, it occurs as if there's fight because people think there's one seat at the table and they have to be the one to get that seat. And so they will do anything. And this isn't for everyone, but there is kind of this idea of like, I have to run everyone over to get what I want because there's only one seat.
And
so, how do we overcome that and make people realize like, hey, there's multiple seats, or we build a bigger table, or bring another chair, or whatever the case is. But even when we're thinking really, I want to get even kind of practical here in terms of what does this really look like, especially in the workplace.
And I think we come from this. I mean, if we see at history what we have gone through, right? I mean, there is this idea, like you said, like we have been talking about, it's like it's been so hard for me that I really need to protect me, right? It's a sense of protecting what I have, what it has been so difficult for me to obtain, right? So, and I think that the first step to kind of get us out of that, right, the unlearning that somebody mentioned in the comments, is this awareness, right? Is this, first of all, is an awareness of like, and developing that habit of asking us, really, is this really the way it is? Really, right? And having more conversations, being open to understanding more about what is really out there. What are the possibilities? What can we really aim for? And be aware of what is out there, what we are thinking, and finding ways to help each other, right? I mean, it has to be a commitment from others who go to that position, when they become aware of what they have done and how much they can teach others, to say, what can I do really to promote this for others? It has to be a commitment to yourself and to the community.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, the stereotypes that are consistently placed on us all day long by society saying, okay, there is only these many positions, Latinos that are holding these positions. We kind of fall into that, okay, well, if there's only 3, then that's it. When technically what we should be saying is we need to unite to create more space, more positions, to push ourselves up to those positions, to request and ask to be those leaders, versus saying, oh, we only have 2. No, we can have more. It's just, what do we need to do as a community to push our voices higher, louder, united, to say we want not just 2, we want 20 positions, and here we are, like, put us in there. I think it's more versus settling for what we're seeing, because we do that a lot it's a complacency. We're like comfortable, todo está bien, vamos a estar suaves, let's party, whatever. I mean, I'm all for that because I do it all the time. But there's going to come to a point where I think we're going to have to, as a community, break through and really say, okay, we're here. We're the biggest population, minority population. Let's go. Like, we need to have those positions. And I get on my soapbox. So I'm going to stop. Get on the soapbox.
Yeah, and there's a comment here, you know, in the chat that says, Liliana put the scarcity mentality equals colonization equals patriarchy, and I think that's really important. That there's also, I think, with patriarchy, I just think about like that there's this ladder that has to be climbed. It has to look like this all the time, and it's everything is logic, and then I mean, there's just so much unlearning, like Alejandra said, right? There's so much unlearning of the way that we operate, and so we've fallen into the pattern. We have our the cultural nuances or these cultural drivers, but then we also have like how these structures and the way they're built and weren't designed for people like us, right? And so that's the other part of it. And so we have to really do our work around that to be able to make we have to do the individual work for ourselves, but we also have to do the work for the collective, right? To make systematic change.
And we need to be, like I said, leaders need to be aware and be able to promote others and create more opportunities, right? For those Latinas who have made it to those positions. And then when we have not made to those positions, we have to ask and have the difficult conversations that nobody wants to have, right? These kind of conversations. And we have to teach up. Manage up, right? It's like, do you know about this? Are you aware of this? Could this be a pattern that is taking place now in our relationship or in this ecosystem, in this context? We need to be brave enough to have those conversations, because we have, like Ruby said, we have a lot of things against us, right? We have our own culture that sometimes is trying to keep us playing small, right? To begin with. And we have, like Ruby said, the system. So it needs to be a very courageous step of having these conversations and making other people aware, right? And not being afraid to really take, and I always say, it takes sometimes 30 seconds of courage to knock the door, to send that email, to have that conversation that and we feel it right in our body that it's going to be a difficult conversation, but we need to bring this up, because by covering and pretending that nothing is going on, that we're all good friends, is not going to help us in any way.
Yeah. And Elise here has a question. Elise says, what about this issue in the community? Entrepreneurs deal with this as well. How do we call it out amongst our sisters?
That's a great question. Go ahead, Patricia.
We're all entrepreneurs here.
Yeah, we really are.
So you have a bit there, but like all of you have your own businesses outside of this collaboration too, right? So you're actually showing that you can have your separate thing and come together. So I'm interested to hear your answer to this.
I think, and I'll just model in the way that the three of us have had this conversation, and it requires just to set the ground rules, right? To speak it and say up front. And I remember the first time that the three of us, once we got through our simpatia and the Latino, "Ay, ¿cómo estás?" And we have this little, the little dance that we do with ourselves, and always, be very nice. And then Patty just brought it up, and she said, let's have a conversation about money. Let's have a conversation about who gets what, and she named it. She said, we're not, we will have conflict. You will have conflict, and we will have. And Patty and I have had at one time a really, what I would call a difficult conversation, but we had agreed from the beginning to set up the rules that we was going to be respectful, that it was not going to be personal, and that no matter what happened, even if the conversation ended up in a way that we didn't want to, that we were going to still be friends and acquaintances. So I think it's about being intentional about setting up these relationships with others, and sort of setting up the rules and the script. And sometimes culturally, we tend to want to be more lenient, or lo que Dios quiera, fatalismo, and really lean into what we call the simpatia script, right? To be all amicable and friendly. And those are great things, because it makes us easy to collaborate with people. But what it gets us in the backlash is that then when we're not being seen or heard, that's what that little ENVIA thing creeps in.
Yeah.
You start to compare who has this and who doesn't have it, and why did I not get it? And mira esa, que se cree? How many times have we said that? Who do you think you are? And so just about an intentionality of having these conversations. And sometimes it doesn't seem very Latina-like, because we're taught for the Marianismo to be calladita es más bonita, to be more submissive. But it's just, I'm seeing a new generation of Latinas embrace el embrismo, right? They're going to speak it and be more powerful. And it takes courage to develop that, and trust, a lot of trust with the people that you're working with, and developing intentional relationships. So that's how I saw it modeling with us. And I think I kind of highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And I think we have to stay objective, right? I mean, and learn how to like Elise said about entrepreneurs, like have this conversation, like talk, like I mean, like reach out to people that you want to collaborate with, and just be brave and say, I want to collaborate with you. Like, is there a way that we can have a conversation, that we can talk about this? Is there a way that we can see what we can learn from each other? There is no danger in ask. There is more danger in not asking and not reaching out, right? Because we have to focus on our professional growth and personal growth. We have to focus on what we can do. Very likely we cannot change people, right? We cannot do if they don't want to change, right? So we cannot ask them to be different from what they are, but we can change ourselves and continue our own personal growth and professional growth, and maybe having little challenges and for us in the sense of having a conversation, asking for something specific, right? Always trying to keep it objective and without taking it completely personal, because as we are growing as individuals, we're always in this mindset of always learning how to do things in a better way. So that should be what guides our thinking, our actions, right?
I think the other thing is realizing that competition isn't always necessarily bad. Like, there's healthy competition.
Sure.
I have to say, honestly, I'm not a very competitive person. I really never have been. It's just, if everyone's familiar with DISC, if you're part of Mujeres, like, I'm green, blue all the way. So I'm like coach supporter, I'm leaning heavy into the green. And so for me, it's always just been about, competing with myself, like wanting to do better for myself.
I just want to add one thing, Ruby, on that. It is a personal intentionality to call it out when it is. Like, call it out. Whenever I meet a new Latina, I always come up with that. I am here to celebrate you. You will not find ENVIA in my script, in the way I behave with you. I want you to succeed. I want to push you. And if you go before me, even better. Like, I'm here to support you. I think we need to just call it out for what it is and say, I am not part of that narrative or script. And then maybe challenge other Latinas to say, and how do you see it? One thing that I noticed when I really was intentional about not feeling, I think the feeling that came up for me when I was speaking with another Latina that maybe had the same, like with these amazing women, right? That we're all doctors and everything like that, where I kind of started feeling like, oh my God, do I belong in this room with these two amazing doctoras? Can I do this? Am I good enough to do this? Like all these voices or doubts came through me. And then I would say, forget it. I don't even want to bother with them. And kind of ended up at some times where, ¿sabes qué? No, ni le voy a hablar. No le voy a mandar un email. Like, you kind of just forget it. And I noticed in myself, I had to be, like Alejandra said, courageous to say, no, I have something to give. Maybe it's not as the same as them too, but I can collaborate, give something. And I need to be brave enough to say, I want to learn from you. I want to be part of your circle. I want to be that Latina that supports you. And so it is this personal intentionality, and you'll feel icky at first because it's not natural to be like, yes, but to comadrear is natural. Like Patricia says, simpatia and the weedy, that's natural. But to go to the next level of genuinity and of like that trust level, that's where it gets a little harder. Yeah. But that's where we need to be as Latinas. Yeah. We need to get past the simpatia and ay, qué bonita, that's wonderful. Let's do that. But then get to the point where it's like, okay, this is business. I'm here to support you. You're here to support me. What do you need? What can I give you? Like we told you, Ruby, what do you need for your book? Hey, you need research? We got you. Like that's where
I'm going to hit you up soon for it. So we're all here.
We're all here. Doctora's ready to help you. I mean, that's where we need to be.
Yeah. And I think once you establish that, it becomes easier, right, to do, because I find that, so honestly, I don't run into this problem of feeling like people are in my way, because I think when you attract, your vibe attracts your tribe, right?
Yes.
So you find other people that are also collaborators. But for those people, I'm not gonna lie, there's some people that I'm like, oh, I wish, how'd she do that? I wish I could do that. But I look at it, I say, well, what are they doing? What can I learn from them? Right? And how can what they're doing complement, or how can I complement, or how I can support? Because I just know, for me personally, I always want to be someone that lifts people up. I never want to be the barrier, right? Elise says, I like what she says here. She says a rising tide lifts all boats,
Yes,
right?
love
Exactly.
that. Love that. I love
And
that.
it's also important to understand that when we have those feelings of like that little bit of a jealousy, a little bit of like, no, it took me a long time for me to be here. I'm not going to whatever it is that you don't want to do, right? When we have those feelings, is we were raised in these cultures where it was extremely important to pretend. The image, the appearances was so powerful in the way
In our
that we were
culture.
raised, right?
¿Qué va a decir la gente? That was
Una
always
vez que la gente, we still work under that assumption that we have to dress up and we have to, all these things that are very, very Latinx in culture, and maybe in different countries in different way, but we have that very strongly. So it's normal that every once in a while you get hit by that, right? But of course, like we've said, that intentionality, they're not taking they're taking it up very objectively, not personally, then we develop these habits. We develop these habits of asking the right questions, reaching out, of seeing, reframing everything in a way that is going to be helpful for you. What can I learn? What can be my next step? What am I going to do with this? Right. So I think is that leaving behind all fears and insecurities and all these other feelings that might not be very productive, in a way that we really, what am I going to learn from here? What is the opportunity in here? I think that's one of the big questions that we should always be asking ourselves. What is the opportunity in everything that I'm doing, the people that I'm meeting, the things that I'm reading? LinkedIn, what is the opportunity in everything, right? It's always that mindset that can really take you far away.
Love that.
Yeah,
You go, amiga. I love that.
And I want to, because I know that there are some men listening too. So this is, and we've talked about this too. And I actually had someone reach out to me, commented on one of my LinkedIn posts, and he asked this question. He said, what can I do to support? He's a leader. He said, what can I do to support Latina women? Because I think I had written about a cultural narrative or something on a LinkedIn post. And I said, he said, what can I do? I was trying to hide this comment here so we can move it. He said, what can I do?
Address Ms. Lopez's comment. That's why it keeps coming. We should address that comment as I was reading it. Sorry. After this.
So he said, what can I do? Like, I see some of the narratives that you're talking about occur with some of the different team members. How do I address it? And how do I support, Latinas in the workplace? And he's someone who has some influence and power. So what kind of recommendations do you have? Because we see this, and we talked about this in one of our conversations. I forgot, was it Dr. Patricia or Dr. Patty, that you were at an event? Maybe you could share with us. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's actually a little bit of my own little personal rant. I felt more supported by Latinas than I have by Latinos, and I'm a mother of 3 sons, so I'm saying this from a place of love, okay? So I was at the Workforce Forum for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and I was in a panel, and we were asked, what can we do to support, it was about individuals of color to different communities. And there was a Black African-American gentleman next to me, and he said, I never consider my work done unless I make sure that the voice of the Black woman is heard in this conversation. And he said, you have not completed what needs to be heard in the room unless you lift up the voice of my Black sisters. And I was like, whoa, I want to hear that from every Latino. Yeah. I want to be able to say, where are we getting our voices lifted? Not do it for me, do it with me. And there's a huge difference, because we do tend to have machismo, and patriarchy is a big part of our culture, being seen as you're doing your job as a man if you're taking care of a woman. But this generation and these Latinas, and I me included, I don't need a man to take care of me. I would just like to have a man that supports me and does it with me and not for me. And I cannot stress enough how we need to shift that narrative. It's specifically our Latina leadership. A man cannot start to figure out what a Latina leader needs. They just can't. And when those voices are not being heard and when we're not being lifted, so I would challenge every Latino that's listening this, I'm mother of 3 Latino sons, and say your job is not done until you make sure that the Latina voice was heard also, because you don't speak for the Latinas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about that, mostly lifting that and providing us opportunities for the voice, and asking us to join and be with you in whatever you're doing, and opportunities for growth. But I could go on and on about this, so I'm just going to jump in.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Patty, and Dr. too, in terms of really in the workplace, what practical steps can someone do? I'm hearing definitely bring that person into the room, bring them into the conversation. What else can be done as a male supporting a Latina?
Yeah, so the one thing that I'm sorry, Alejandra.
Go ahead.
One thing that we see in Latinos, they don't notice that they're not supporting us, because again, machismo is alive and real. Let me tell you, so it's just natural to them. So what they need to do is be a little bit more intentional and a little ground themselves to say, you know what, this is a new time. Yes, my father was in charge of the household, and we have to ask permission to our fathers and all this. There's a particular perception and narrative that was set. But in today's world, like Patricia said, it's not the same. The new Latina is the new Latina. And so they need to be intentional in everything that they're doing. If they are promoting a panel and there's just Latino men, they should be like, oh, wait a second, we don't have the voice of the Latina woman. If they're seeing a particular article and they're just showing and showcasing Latino men, there should be like, okay, wait a minute, where's the Latina woman? Not just put her in the little square next to the big man. No, make her the big man, front page, right? And so those are the things that I think the Latinos need to be intentional about. And without their support, as this African-American gentleman did in this panel, we will just be fighting this fight by ourselves. And we shouldn't have to. We are a community. We are familia. And so it is a new way of thinking for the men. But I do think they have it within them, because they're part of this amazing culture as we are. We understand the importance of being there for each other. They just need to kind of a mindset shift and be intentional.
Yeah. And I have to give a shout out, because Refugio, who is on here, he's writing a book on leadership right now. He's works at Abby. He's been a great supporter. He has said to me, how can I support you, Ruby? I want to support you. Murray Mann, who I think is probably listening to, is also. So there are definitely men out there that are wanting to support. And I just want to acknowledge that and there's still real work to do, because like you said, machismo still definitely exists, right? I was out of town this week and my ex-husband asked me, are you getting paid for this? Why are you doing it? I said, it's none of your business. Kids, right?
I think we have to be very aware of that. I have to aware about how we play into it as women, right?
Yes, also, yes.
The actions that we do, the thoughts that we have, the reactions that we don't have, right? About this machismo. I mean, is like it's been said, it's real and live, right? So we have to be very aware of what we're thinking. That's why awareness is such an important thing. How am I playing into this? What is my reaction? How am I acting, right? So we have to be careful about that, always being very aware of that. And we also have to develop the habits as men, as women, of asking the right questions and identifying patterns, right? Identifying patterns in society. What's going on here? Who is present? Who is not present? Mm-hmm. If every leader could ask those 2 questions every single day in every single action, that would make such a big difference. Who is here? Who's not here? Which voices are being heard? Which voices are not heard? And I have coached people to put in a post-it and take it with them everywhere. You go into a place, you go into a meeting, you go into a lunchroom, you assign work. Who is getting this assignment? Who is not getting this assignment? Always, so we can get very good, very proficient in identifying patterns, because patterns are there everywhere. They're everywhere. So once we identify them, it's like you cannot do anything without being aware of, right? So now you identify, you have to do, okay, what actions I'm going to take so I can disrupt these patterns? Who am I going to invite? Who am I not going to start a conversation unless I have whose voices in here? I'm not going to assign any kind of job or anything or assignment unless somebody else's is with me, so I don't have to make a single decision on my own, right? So we identify those patterns and then we try to disrupt them very intentionally, right? And learn about the struggles of the Latina, of the women. There's information, there's book, have these conversations. Another question that I use a lot is, what about when, I can only imagine if anyone in my career had sat with me and asked me the following question: what about your lived experience is important for me to understand or to know more about? What about you as a Latina professional woman and your lived experience is important for me to understand? If somebody had that 5 minutes of having that conversation with me, that would mean so much, and it would tell so much about the kind of person that manager could have been, or that whoever that person was, right? Always it's important to keep learning. There are ways to learn about. There are data out there. Take a look at data, right? How many men know when it's Latina Pay Day, right? For example.
Yeah. And I have a question. I have two comments and then I have a question. One is, I really like what you said about asking who's present, who's not present, whose voice is being heard, whose voice isn't being heard. That's not a difficult task to take on, right? Because you can have someone sitting in the room, but they're still very quiet, and so to really start to notice like who's speaking up and who's not speaking up, and do we invite that person to share so that their voice can be heard? The other thing I was going to say is around the, us playing into the Marianismo scripts. I love the topic of Marianismo. If any of you have seen me on LinkedIn, I love talking about all the different cultural scripts, and they kind of fascinate me. And it was funny because one day I realized, oh my God, I do everything for my two boys. Like, like I serve them food, I clean up right after them, I clean their clothes, like todo, right? Like, and they're 10 and almost 16. Like, a lot of these things they can do themselves, and it's just me and my two boys at home. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like I am creating like these little men that like, I'm catering everything. And then I saw this, I don't know if anyone saw this, I saw this Instagram video of like the mom that was sitting there like practically feeding herself, wiping the napkin with this food, and I'm like, oh my God, that's me. And my boyfriend, who's white, was like, oh my God, that is exactly you. Like, I'm always telling you, and I'm like, I don't think I realized it until now. So it's just funny because I found myself following this script, even though I'm someone that like writes about this, that this is how careful, I mean, I say this to say, this is how careful we have to be to really notice these patterns. So I sat my sons down and I said, listen, I've been doing everything for you, and things have to change, because I want you to know that like, women don't only, do these jobs. And, my 10-year-old was like, duh, I know that, Mom. Well, I want you to really know, and I need you to start picking up some slack, because we're a team in this house. And so you also have to learn. But again, like, it was just one of those things. But I have a question regarding, Alejandra, what you were saying, and any of you can answer. One of the things, when we talk about barriers, I hear a lot of times that, that Latinas aren't advocating for themselves enough. But then there's research, Lean In. There was a report from Lean In that came in either at the end of the last year or the beginning of this year that said that even though, maybe it came around Latina Bay Day, in fact, even though Latinas are just as qualified, have the same amount of degrees, are in fact asking for things like raises, that they're still not getting them. And so there's this, when you're all doctors, right, and really heavily lean on research. So what do we say to folks that are in that situation that find like they are doing the thing, trying to advance, but they're still not getting the opportunity?
Yeah. I think that goes back to sometimes the system is the barrier, right? That places that we are in weren't made for us. But I see that for me personally, it's definitely happened, and even in the past week, where you do what you know what you need to do, and you stand up, you speak up, you use your voice, and it's still not shut down, but it's still just not taken into account. And so my advice would be to, if you need to mourn or kind of be down a little bit about that, that's okay, but you can't stay there. And so my sister once told me, you can't sit in that hole by yourself. You need to get up, get out, and continue, because you are paving paths for other Latinas behind you. And then I turned to my comadres. So then I find my tribe, my comadres, who I can speak to about it and maybe say, what can I do better? How can we change this? What is there to do? And just getting that tribe of women that can help you get through it, but also know it's not you. In the end, it had nothing to do with you. Again, the system is sometimes not set up for us, but we cannot let the system break us down, and we cannot let the system stop us from advancing. So continue, maybe reassess whether you should be there or not at this particular organization. Reassess if you really want that client or not, if they say no to you. But we must continue fighting. I know it's hard, but
And the question again, what is opportunity here for me? What is opportunity? What am I going to learn? What am I going to get out of this? And we live in a very unequitable world and society. There's a lot of inequities, and there are a lot of situations that we have no control over. So like I always say, we can control the controllables, right? Control what you can control. Control your learning, control your mindset, control your persistence, right? Control those things, control what you can control, and hopefully the rest will fall in place, right? But we cannot play into a victim mode, right? We cannot go into victim mode with that, because that is not going to teach you anything, right? That is not productive. So always try and think about this question: what is the opportunity in here? If you are spiritual or religion, whatever, just please help me understand the opportunity here. What is that this is giving me the opportunity to do and learn? Because there's always something to learn. And I know it sounds kind of cliche and whatever, but that is the way that we can continue our personal growth. And that is what we can control. And that is the objective for our lives here, right? To continue to be better people.
Yeah, and I always say, when we can transform ourselves, then we can focus on transforming our families, our communities, our organizations. But it begins with learning to do that for ourselves. And Dr. Patricia put a great book in here. This is Uncolonized Latina. If you haven't gotten it, highly recommend it.
Valeria is the author.
I know it. She's the bomb. Like,
she's amazing.
I think this is like just a groundbreaking book. And let me tell you that Valeria is the one who inspired me to write the book that I'm currently working on. And I reached out to her and I said, because I'm going through the book writing program she went through. And I was a little worried, because I thought, I don't know how people are, sometimes about that competition, this very conversation we're having. But she was so generous, gave me so much advice. And so that's definitely a book, and she talks a lot about some of these cultural mindsets and scarcity as well. And I think that, one thing we didn't touch on, and I'd like to just touch on briefly, because I know we're almost at the end of our hour, but just about this scarcity. And I think a lot of this is passed down generationally, even, because I've just experienced it in my own family as well. It's easy just to say, like, oh, well, just have an abundance mindset, because it sounds easy, but then, like, it's like, how do you do that? So I'm curious about, what you might have to say in order to start developing that abundance mindset, because it doesn't automatically switch.
Yeah,
so how do we develop that more?
And that's for me something that I am working very hard. I mean, not working very hard, but I'm working very intentionally on it, right? Because of our religion, because we have to be very humble, and because all that Catholicism that in my case, right, was imparted to me about the good things are in the other life, all those things, right, that we are growing with. It has been fascinating, to say the least, when I have read and podcasts about this abundance mentality, how to realize, like, wow, my family was on the opposite spectrum of that. I mean, on the opposite, and like, and we live a good life. I mean, I don't want to say that we were living in poverty or anything like that. So we had a decent life, right? But we're still in that mentality. So it's my only thing is that learning, get your hands on books, get your hands on podcasts, listen to that, notice, like, oh wow, this is how the people are thinking. What am I thinking? Journaling. I think that journaling is an amazing tool. Can be scary. It can be scary because sometimes we don't like what we write, and then we find the notebooks from 5 years ago, and you're like, oh, I wrote this, right? But I think is those two, learning, listening to books, and journaling, for me, have been very useful tools. And I would love to hear from my
Can you tell Dr. Alejandra is our executive coach on the team? I mean, when it comes to executive coaching. Patricia and I are all about the research.
Good combination, though, right?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Patricia. I think Patricia's experience in this topic, I think, is so. I'm always wowed by her and her perspective, because it blows me away.
So just a couple of things. I mean, I do think that there is a reframing, and that is a conscious reframing, and that's what Alejandra goes to. I think the journaling and just really understanding what it is. And then I know this is probably going to sound a little bit kind of old school, religious, whatever. I think a gratitude is a shifting of gratitude, and it actually ties to the ENVIA script, that sometimes we're focusing on what's lacking and what we don't have. But I think having a mind frame of gratitude always helps you to take action for what's next, right? Because you may say, I may not have all of this, and I may do, but this is what I already have with. So, and I struggle with that. I really have. This morning, I had one of those bouts of like driving to work and had to say, okay, help me be grateful. Let me have a grateful mindset, because it's easy to go down that rabbit hole. And I don't mean settling. That doesn't mean settling. Yeah. It's just a different mind frame. And I know this all sounds like words and whatever. I'm actually, we're putting together a little, if you follow us at the Puente Institute on LinkedIn, we just started really digging in there because we found that we have a good audience there. Putting a little article on a little bit on ENVIA. What does it do for you harmfully? And then some really actionable steps that you can take. And so we'll probably put that up at the end of the week out there. So maybe those of you that want the list, 1, 2, 3, tell me what to do. Not that this solves it all, but kind of give you some actionable steps. So be looking for that. Follow us on LinkedIn, because that we'll put something. I'll have it ready, and Patty, and
yes,
by the end of the week.
And we also want to invite, we are going to do a master class to continue this kinds of conversation in a smaller group. More intensity, really digging down, because yes, it's all easier said than done.
Well, I feel like we could go on for hours. Yeah, right? I feel like we just touched the surface.
It is, I know. But so the masterclass that we're going to do for Latinas is going to go into exactly this. So we're going to talk about the research, then we're going to talk, what does it look like for you as an individual, as a leader, what is holding you back, what can we do to help you get the language and the mindset to shift. So also look out for that with us, with the Puente Institute.
Oh, so exciting. Well, thank you for everyone for joining in. This has been such a great conversation. I think there's been a lot of, I feel like I have to go back and even listen to myself. I was trying to write down some of the questions, because there's a lot of reflective questions that we can be asking ourselves, and steps to take. And I would just challenge everyone who's listening to really look at, really think about, collaboration over competition. How do we support each other? When one rises, we all rise. I love celebrating with other, mujeres and, women that are doing awesome things, because when they do it, it just shows that we can all do it. And so, and it makes it easier for the next person too, right? That they don't have to go through some of the struggles that we've gone through. So please, I'm going to ask you a quick question before we wrap up, if it's okay. And please make sure to go follow each of the doctoras on LinkedIn and El Puente Institute, so you can make sure you get that ENVIA. My Spanish is pocho, so
Information. We'll be doing a lot of information, Sarah.
But make sure to follow them so you can get that script. But my last question is, if you were going to give one piece of advice for a woman who wants to collaborate more, instead of like be, so competitive with each other, what would that one final piece of advice be?
Ooh, good question. Who's first?
I would say go for it. Go and take those 30 seconds of courage, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. But just go and ask, connect with people. For example, LinkedIn. I would not be here without LinkedIn. All these people around me have been through LinkedIn. So connect, reach out, and again and again and again. And sometimes some people are busy and they have their lives and whatever, but there's a lot of power in those networks, in those connections. So 30 seconds it might take, write and connect and make an appointment and just go out and just, it sounds like a commercial, but just do it, really connect. And if there's a lot of beauty, I am a half full glass kind of person. I do believe that there's more beauty than not beauty, and so I always think like it has to be there. Is there? And I'm gonna go and get it. So just go and connect with people.
For me, it's the one piece of advice is I've seen in all of us as Latinos that our mission is familia, is to be unidos. I say live your mission, live it in everything you do each day, in the people that you connect with, and with other Latinas. We need each other to change the future, to close the Latina, to close that pay gap. That's horrible. Just those numbers drive me crazy. And if we need to do it together. So unidas. I love, Patricia always says, como el grito de poderosas, right? There's the whole grito thing. Like we need to get in that mode. And I feel a shift coming on.
Mm-hmm. I was just with saying, if you can foster mentorship and support. I think somebody mentioned something about, and as probably the oldest person on the phone call, on the call, it's about, giving back. I feel like I'm most successful when I give others back, and just take that LinkedIn connection that may not yield anything for you. It probably won't, but it will be meaningful for somebody else, especially with younger Latinas. When they reach out, I never say no. I always have time. I can certainly point you to the right direction, listen, or nothing else. I'll validate what you're feeling. So I just say, take that time to mentorship and give back to others, because I think that's going to make a difference to whoever you open that opportunity to.
And Ruby, you rock. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I am just privileged to be with all these doctoras and just taking in all this information. So I love it. Latinas, this is an opportunity to support each other, to uplift each other, to remember that when one rises, all of us rise. And in order, and we need to stand united, right? Because there's a lot of things going on out there. And it's going to take more than just one person to change and create new systems. So I want to just encourage everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I know how busy all of you are. Appreciate you. And I look forward to getting your newsletter on Friday. Make sure again to follow all of these wonderful women on LinkedIn and to attend their upcoming masterclass. So thank you. And next week, just a quick shout out. Next week we will have Karina Mora Betts on the call, and she will be talking about reclaiming our cultural identity. Some of us have asked ourselves, am I Latina enough? Can I call myself a Latina? Right? I mean, you heard me say my Spanish is kind of and that was always a struggle because I don't eat chile. I can't dance. And then my Spanish is broken. So I'm like, am I really Mexican, right? Like,
yes, you are.
We're going to talk about her journey, what it's been like to kind of reclaim some of her identity in the different ways that she's done that. So that'll be next week. I don't have a name for the show. I feel like I need to name it. So if you all have some ideas, let me know, because I'm doing it weekly now. But again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Adios.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Adios.